Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. You're either watching us on television or hearing us on the radio or listening to us on the web or watching us on the web. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers, and we are going to discuss the national news of the day. Later in the show, we're also going to discuss what is happening with the Republican Party. They lost big this last election, and yet they're making no effort to rebrand or change the strategy. That's going to be the primary topic for the second half of the show. But today, right now, the news, probably the biggest news is President Joe Biden's announcement that that he is going to be ordering a pullout of troops from Afghanistan as of September 11th. Extending it. Originally, it was supposed to be May, and he is basically overriding the Pentagon on this. The military is saying, no, we're not ready. We don't know when we're going to be ready. But he said, basically, I am now the fourth president to have to deal with this. It's been 20 years. I am not going to hand it off to another president if I can help it. And so they're talking about pulling out. Question is will it be like the pullout of Vietnam, which spread over into Cambodia, year zero, a lot of killings, that type of thing. Will it all just fall apart instantly? The question is maybe it will, but what can we do there? This is a society that has had problems going way back, even before the British attempt to occupy and pacify it. British failed, Soviets failed in the 1980s, largely against the same. We were supporting the same people we ended up fighting. They were calling that blowback. Chuck, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, as far as what we can do or what anybody can do, I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I don't know that anybody does. As you said, we've been there for 20 years by now, and others have been there before us and left. And you also mentioned Vietnam. There's another example. Korea, there's another example. The Middle East, there's another example. We do see ourselves as the world's policemen, and because we are the richest country and well armed, there's a reason for that. But at some point, locals have to get their own stuff together and get their own house together. And there's no denying that. I'm not sure that there's anything we can do. And the reason I say that is if there was something that could be done in Afghanistan or any other hotspot region over the last several millennia, somebody would have come up with the idea. Yet here we are again. And, once again, we're not the first to give it a try in Afghanistan, probably not the last. So, at some point, don't locals have to figure things out themselves?
Well, it's been 20 years. On the other hand, you've heard of Code Pink. They're the anti-war group. I don't know if they're still around, but they were around for quite some time, a response group, left-wing response group, and with Medea Benjamin being one of their major spokespeople. So, excuse me. And they went to Afghanistan in 2009. This is 11 years ago. And, they were talking about how we support you and we support immediate pullout of imperialist troops. And they were at a conference of women, feminist women, all of them kind of as radical as they were, who said, you can't, your country can't pull out right now. If they do, we have girls who've been going to school. They will not be able to continue. Some of them will be killed or maimed. We need the protection. We need the stability, for now. And Medea Benjamin and some of them were like coming back. Oh, maybe we need to rethink this. They came back, and their organization went and found Afghani women who would say something closer to what they wanted to hear. But if Code Pink could be sent through an existential, crisis, personal crisis that way, of wondering if they've got the right position in this case, I mean, it does raise a lot of questions. Girls are learning how to read, are becoming educated right now. Will they be able to continue with their educations? Will the ones who've, become well-read be attacked, acid thrown in their faces, or killed? I mean, this is a subject we don't know what's going to happen. It did not go well for women, when the Taliban ran the place before. It was pretty bad for women. For a lot of the leftists who say, well, the burqa, we shouldn't we shouldn't be opposed to rules wearing the burqa. It's a symbol of liberation. It wasn't to the women of Kandahar when Allied troops got there. I don't think it was the Americans first. I think the Danes got there first, but troops got there and drove the Taliban out, and women threw their burqas into a pile, gassed them, and torched them. Obviously, they didn't see it as a symbol of liberation. But what can we do? That was 11 years ago. Yeah. How long? And are we just putting off the inevitable? So what do you think?
Well, and American soldiers, men and women, being killed, and how long do we wait? And maybe more nuanced than that, what should our expectations be when we go into a country like that? At what point do we say to them, we don't see that you're making any progress, and we can't afford any more blood or treasure here? When are you going to decide to remedy some of these problems? I mean, is that an unfair question to ask, or do we just say, well, okay, we're going to go into any country around the world that's not doing well, and we'll spend our money, and our kids will die? I mean, what's your solution? What's your admonition there? What do we do?
I don't know. I mean, it was really interesting because in the 2000 campaign, then candidate George Bush says, I won't advocate nation building. And then he ended up doing it right in two countries, right? Yeah. Iraq and Afghanistan. You can't nation build. I mean, I do have, this is how I was raised. My parents were against the war in Vietnam, organized, and the rest. And I have the Star Trek prime directive of non-interference ethic in my mind. I don't think that exteriorly problems like that can be solved. The development, it's got to come from within. They've had a chance to get women educated, other people educated, to establish a secular kind of a society, and hopefully they can hold on to it. I really hope they can. The Taliban have been weakened. The Al-Qaeda is all but destroyed. So, it may be that they can hold on, and it may be that the military is just being overly conservative about it, and that Biden is looking at opportunities here and figuring, okay, we got 5 months. Let's see what happens.
Well, see, my default view is exactly the same as yours. I would say, well, here's what we do. And instead of using military force, we help undergird their education system. We help with their infrastructure. We help with hospitals, schools, and road building, and things like that. And to lift up society in general. But when that doesn't work, what do you do then?
Yeah. Well, and apparently that's working, but they have a lot of corruption that they have to deal with too in the secular powers. They have, the military, people abandoning, excuse me, even people who turned out to be radicals. How do they screen them? But like I said, it's been 2 decades, almost exactly.
Yeah.
I think we invaded Afghanistan within a couple of weeks after 9/11. So, it'll be 20 years minus a couple of weeks since we have invaded and occupied that country. So anyway.
I know. And look, I mean, you mentioned Vietnam, look how long we were there, how much we spent, and how many people died. And, supposedly the lesson there was to not get involved in a civil war or any kind of civil dispute, because it's unlikely that we're going to be able to solve their internal problems. Maybe that's a lesson we're learning yet again.
I
don't have an answer. I really don't have the answer.
Right. I mean, of course, Vietnam was almost as long. I mean, people,
Yeah.
take it from 1964 when the escalation happened, but we had advisors in there messing things up as early as 1957.
Yeah.
It goes back to that time,
And the
and
French
so
there before that.
right, and it didn't work out for a while, but in the long run, Vietnam pulled it together. But Afghanistan, it doesn't just have, a couple of decades. I mean, Vietnam had fought war first against the Japanese occupation, then later against the French, and then later against us. And that was really hard. And they seem to be doing pretty well. But Afghanistan's got a long history of, what we would call backward.
Yeah. Right.
Collective thinking on a lot of parts, some very reactionary, even pre-feudal notions.
No, I don't think so. I think it's as complicated a problem as any president has inherited, and other presidents have inherited similar problems and of both parties and have not had the answers either. This is an ongoing global societal problem that's unlikely to be fixed anytime soon, I think.
Next topic, Kristen Clark. Maybe many of you don't know anything about her, but she has been nominated by Biden to hold the Civil Rights Division, to head up the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. It is a position that requires Senate approval, and she basically is facing a lot of opposition. She's an African American woman. Really interesting is that she would be the first African American person of color to hold the position of the Civil Rights Department. So, anyways, she is being hit because of what things she wrote when she was 19 years old, when she was in college, she supported Mumia Abu Jamal, called him a hero. They brought out Tucker Carlson on Fox News brought out the widow of the officer who was allegedly killed by Jamal, and she's calling Clark a disgusting person for that. She apparently was with a group involved with a group that invited somebody who was anti-Semitic to a panel, said she would never do that again, didn't know what was going on. She wasn't even the one who made the invitation, but she was part of the group. And then she wrote a satirical letter about Black intellectual superiority, which was a direct response to the bell curve. And apparently a lot of people missed the parody, didn't think it was funny. And so they're using these items of her past, everything in the last century, by the way, almost nothing from the past 21 years, to try to paint her as a radical who should not have the position. Well, it's the hearings got pretty contentious today, and we'll talk about that. But what are your thoughts, Chuck?
Well, I'm wondering if hearings like this are just a microcosm of the dysfunction of our national discourse. I'm not sure this committee or any other committee in Washington could even have a discussion about the blue sky and the round earth without people trying to dig into people's backgrounds and finding some joke that they made at some point about anything. So I'm not at all surprised by this, not at all. But I think it gets to just a more foundational problem that especially in Washington right now, there is no topic and no human being who could go before any committee in Washington and have a discussion about the real issues. It would all come down to us versus them. And if this is a person being nominated by a Democratic administration, then all the Republicans will oppose it no matter what. And the reverse would be true as well. This is not surprising. I think it's just more of the same garbage that's going on in Washington right now. And it's a microcosm of the fact that we can't have a discussion in this country about anything, really. I mean, not about anything, not about driving on the left or driving on the right or passing or anything else. It's just not possible. And this is a good example of it. It's kind of a waste of time and energy. And it's yet another reason why people are disgusted with politics and politicians at this point.
I have to agree because there's no argument that she's not qualified.
Right.
Nobody has argued that she is unqualified. Everybody acknowledges that she's got, is extremely skilled, extremely intelligent, great, in terms of her competence as an attorney and everything else, on a history of success in her fights. It's because of what happened, starting when she was 19. I mean, I think of the things I wrote when I was 19.
Yeah.
It's just, and she was young and a little bit more radical, perhaps like a lot of people in college are, and held a different perspective. The one thing that she feels bad about was having invited the anti-Semitic guy, and even that is kind of tricky because it's somebody, I don't even remember the name of the guy, but it's not a Nation of Islam guy, but somebody along similar lines. But really, that's just it was the group that she was in, so guilt by association because
Right.
she was so. But the interesting thing about this hearing is there were 3 hearings today that were going on, 2 House hearings and this hearing, and that all devolved into the same debate. You also had the hearing on whether or not D.C. should become a state, and a hearing on whether or not there should be reparations for slavery.
Mm-hmm.
All 3 hearings devolved into arguments about the Georgia law, the so-called reform of voting rights in Georgia. That is obviously the topic, but that is absolutely where we're at.
Yeah, I think the whole thing has to do with power and a cohort on the far right, not even center right people, but a cohort on the far right that is absolutely terrified about the demographic trends that they see in this country. So, I think just about everything in Washington right now, and in most of the states maybe as well, as far as politics goes, is about power and not getting things done, and the concern about who's going to have power going forward and what's going to happen. It's all about that. It's about power and money and who's going to control the purse strings and the power in the future. And it's stalling our progress. And to some extent, that's the whole point from the far right, is to try to maintain the status quo as long as they can.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's going to be intense, and I'll tell you my prediction as to the outcome of the hearing at the end of the show. But
okay, I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right. Well, I know that one of my partners, law partners, and my assistant both within the past couple of days received their one and done Johnson & Johnson shot just in time. I mean, literally the day before it's been paused. Now, it probably won't be paused for long, but yes, and Matt and I got his on Saturday. I mean, it really is. People just got it in under the gun. See, I'm still waiting for my second one. I got the Pfizer one, but and so far none of the 3 have had blood clots, by the way. But it's been paused because blood clots have been associated with them in women under 48 years old. And the question I have is the same question I have when Europe paused its major vaccine, I forget what it's called.
AstraZeneca.
Thank you. For the same reason. And it took them, the better part of a week before they started up again. Who knows when they're going to start up Johnson & Johnson again? Probably not long. But, we know that people are dying every day, not in large numbers as they were a couple months ago, but still large numbers that, who knows how many lives are going to be lost because of that pause in those vaccines, as opposed to the risk of blood clots, which I understand one person passed away because she didn't get help in time. and waited too long, but everybody else seemed to get through it fine. But weighing the risks, I don't know if that's how if it's mandatory under the regulatory scheme, but something is wrong there. There's just the perspective is they're really frustrating in Europe because it's they're talking about going back down to lockdowns and to stop it based on when they didn't even know it was, when it was all anecdotal at that point. They started it up again and they know how to deal with the clots, but I question the weighing of the risks there.
Yeah, I think there were 6 cases of that blood clot reaction out of a little more than 7 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine administered. So, it's more than a 1 in a million. And, I agree. I think that this pause obviously is out of an abundance of caution. And for a lot of reasons, some legal, some political, some healthcare concerns as well. But I agree, in a healthcare emergency, a public health emergency like we're in, 6 problems out of 7 million seems to be minimal. And you're right. Now they do know about this reaction and what to do with it. I have a feeling that in the not too distant future, I mean in days or weeks, they'll begin again administering the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. In the meantime, production continues with Pfizer and Moderna. I think you said you had Pfizer. I've had 1 dose of Moderna. I'm waiting for the second of the Moderna. But I think at some point they'll restart the Johnson & Johnson administration of vaccines. I just don't know who's going to get it and when. And the other thing we don't know is what the reaction of some people is going to be as far as fear of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine once they restart it. So you may see early on in the restart of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine of people saying, no, I will wait for Pfizer or Moderna. So there are going to be some people who do that just, out of caution for themselves.
All right. Well, that takes care of that. Johnson & Johnson's had a bad couple of weeks after messing up 15 million.
Yes, right. That was in a Baltimore factory. That was a problem too. Yeah.
All right. Well, that takes us to the next topic. Okay, this topic is quite a tricky one to do in the time that we have allotted for it. But as everybody knows, the trial, Chauvin trial, who is accused of murdering George Floyd, has been happening. And one of the remarkable aspects about this trial is that there are officers coming to testify against him, including his senior chief testifying against him, and as well as paramedics and the like. It's unusual. And unfortunately, while this trial is happening, there was a completely other incident that happened, what appears to have been a pretext stop based upon air fresheners hanging from the mirror, which apparently is an infraction in Minnesota. Pulling him over, he got out of the car, got back into the car after some argument or something. I'm not quite sure what happened. They are getting excited. His girlfriend's in the car. They're getting excited. Woman screams, "Taser, taser, taser!" Shot goes off, and the young man dies. But what's interesting is that she was suspended immediately, essentially fired, and is now, as of today, facing manslaughter charges. This didn't happen, at least not this quickly in the past. Another incident which has happened in the past couple of weeks is an officer in uniform, a soldier in uniform was in a car, was being pulled over. He wanted to get to a safer spot to be pulled over. They thought he was trying to run or something like that. And they basically, he said when they pulled over, because they were so agitated, he says, "Officer, I'm afraid to get out of the car." He says, "You better be afraid." Really inappropriate and unprofessional to say under any context. And ended up getting pepper sprayed. He's suing. The officer was fired. What's interesting about these 3 incidents is the swiftness with which the authorities, within the authorities, are coming down on these officers. Yeah. Maybe they don't want riots to happen anymore. Maybe some officers are like thinking, "Boy, this is making my job more difficult." And granted, the gentleman who was killed. It wasn't just the air fresheners. He had an expired tag, and then they learned there was a warrant for his arrest, and that's how the argument happened. So, but still, it was the woman officer who is being charged said that she had believed that she was holding a taser. Turned out she was holding a gun. That story we've heard before. I'll talk about in a minute, but I want you to chime in as to what you think about whether or not the blue wall of silence is collapsing, or at least starting to.
Well, I think there are cracks in it for sure. As far as the speed of the reaction goes, I think some of that has to do with exactly what you alluded to there, and that's local jurisdictions seeing what has happened around the country and around the world, actually, recently. Because a lot of these things now, because everybody has a telephone and a camera, these things are recorded. There's video of it, so the public can see what's happening, and they know who's being stopped and who's being harmed. And so I think some of it has to do with the fact that local jurisdictions do want to try to dampen down the reaction. That's one thing. As far as the testimony of officers, though, against other officers, I wonder about that. Again, I go back to the fact that there's video of all this, so people can plainly see what is happening, and that's, that hasn't been happening except since the advent of cell phones and cell phone video. So I wonder if some of the testimony of chiefs of police, especially, and supervisors of officers as well, might have to do with some self-preservation, because they see these videos and they think, I don't want to be named in a lawsuit because of what this guy did, and I don't want my department sued, and since I'm the chief, I don't want to be named in that suit since I'm running the department, seeing what this guy did. So, some of it may be that, look, it's on video that the guy made a mistake. I don't want to take the fall for that. Do you see what, I don't know if I'm explaining that right? You're the lawyer. What do you think about that?
I hear that. I also think that there's an element of, if you have certain people in the country, particularly young African Americans, who believe their lives are in danger, when they're being pulled over. I mean, if I get pulled over, I'm like, oh God, am I going to have to face a ticket or whatever? I'm nervous about it. I make sure my hands are on the steering wheel, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, all that kind of stuff. And I'm cautious. I'm aware of the fact that the person, who has the power over me has a gun, and might be nervous himself or herself. But if I'm a young African American and I'm seeing all this stuff happening and seeing how easily it can happen, and I'm scared for my life, that's not a safe situation for anybody in that situation. That's not a safe situation for the officers, especially if he's armed. And and we have these, as I think you mentioned in a conversation before the show, all of these guns are out there. People have these guns, and it's not just white people who have rights to possess guns. African Americans do too, and if it's in the car, it is potentially dangerous. It's got to be on the minds. And so when you have these incidents that just add, going around YouTube, on the internet, on television, it just adds to the intensity of every single pullover, every single one.
I think it's perfectly understandable why folks in law enforcement who have a dangerous job to start with are even more on edge these days, because they know that, some of the statistics indicate that there are more guns in the United States than people. So, they're thinking that the odds of somebody being armed that they're stopping are pretty good. And that's concerning to them, understandably. So, this points out a foundational problem with this society being armed to the teeth. And what's law enforcement supposed to do? It points out the need for criminal justice reform, and it points out the need for some sort of gun reform. in this country.
But for a long time, you even saw it on the television shows as if it was a virtue. There was a code of silence among the police. There still is. There is. There is a code that says, well, you can fudge things a little bit on the stand because you really got to get the bad guy. That's the most important thing. And you back each other up. And you don't testify. Cops don't testify against cops. That has been a long saying. Van Adder said that to an expert witness in the OJ trial, and it became a big deal, a motion to basically exclude Van Adder's testimony. He got caught in a lie anyway, but the officer Van Adder in that. But he just came up, went afterwards and said, "You're scum for testifying against police," right? That was the code. And it seems to be at minimum softening right now, and maybe self-preservation, and is an incident. Maybe officers are tired of this too. I mean, it's so different in every other country. Iceland, they've had one killing by a cop in the past 100 years, and when that happened, even though the officers were cleared, it was considered a national tragedy. Right? It's not even news here. It happens every day. And it doesn't just happen to African Americans. The biggest number of people who are shot and killed by police are whites, but not proportionate. It's proportionate to the African American population. It's a lot higher, but a lot of people are shot and killed. Others are beaten, and sometimes based on mistakes. Sometimes, anyway, it's a concern, and I'm wondering if we've seen a beginning of change.
Let's hope so. It highlights the fact that we need to have some sort of national discussion about a lot of topics, don't we? I mean, we need societal reform on just about every level on most issues at this point.
Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. The cause of democracy.
We are going to raise issues that, historically have not been raised.
What about the nuclear option, doing away with the filibuster? I can tell you that would be the end of the Senate as it was originally devised.
All of this is possible for America. Who was standing in the way? Mitch McConnell.
Where an insurrection that sought to overturn an election, when that failed, the action moved into state capitals.
Okay, in the past, when one of the major parties has lost elections on a big scale, particularly if they lost all three or both houses of Congress and the presidency, or at least suffered in a big way, there's always a big discussion. What went wrong? What can we do better next time? Do we need to revise some of our ideas, our platform? Do we need to have different strategies? That happened after 2000. It happened after 2004. I mean, pretty much every election up till 2012. And it even happened with Democrats in 2016. How did we let this guy win? There seems to be no discussion of that since 2000, the 2020 election, when the Republicans failed to retake the House and lost the Senate, barely, but lost it in a couple elections that they probably shouldn't have lost. And lost the presidency, and yet there's no discussion about what led them there. I mean, if you wanted to give me the biggest reason they lost, it was Trump. But there's certainly no concern about, well, maybe we need to not come across that way. Maybe we need to broaden our appeal. It's not happening. There's no discussion of it. In fact, Trump seems to be retaking influence of the party. Nikki Haley, who said, a couple months ago, Trump's period is over. It's time for him to set aside. I'm hoping to run in 2024. Came out either yesterday or today and said, yeah, if Donald Trump runs, I'll step aside and let him run. I won't do anything without talking to him. Mitch McConnell, who Trump has just been vilifying because McConnell didn't back him up to basically overturn the election, and he vilified the Supreme Court. Trump is just attacking everybody. Now McConnell's saying, "Oh, I want to put an end to this." Even though he's being attacked, his life was put into danger on January 6th, just like everybody else's, and some of these Republicans who were willing to stand up seem to be caving. A few exceptions. Liz Cheney still staying strong, saying this is crazy. Why are we indulging this guy? But everybody else seems to nobody wants to take a stand against Trump or that brand of politics. What do you think's going on, Chuck?
Well, you're right. That's the absolute correct analysis. Part of it, I think, is that politics is no longer about public policy. I mean, let's remember in the 2020 election, the Republican Party officially announced that they had no platform, that they were just supporting the individual, the person, Donald Trump. They put out no policy statements, no policy platform at all to run on, none. And they did that officially. I mean, that was their official stand. They released that. The platform committee is where that came from. They said there is no platform. This is all about Donald Trump. So that's part of our problem, is that we no longer have public policy discussions. It's just about individuals. And I'm glad you brought up Nikki Haley, because that's an interesting case study there. Let's remember in the 2015-2016 campaign, she aligned herself with Marco Rubio and showed up at some of Rubio's primary rallies, before the Republican primaries, supporting Rubio and taking a definitive stand against Donald Trump. And on stage with Marco Rubio, talking about how he was unfit for office, that the Republican Party does not stand for all this. And yet here we are. After that, she became the UN ambassador, the ambassador to the United Nations for the United States, appointed by Trump. And now she says, oh, if Donald Trump runs, of course I would support him. So, she's now revealing herself to be just the same old standard hypocritical politician who's just in it for herself. So here we go again. It's no longer about public policy. Our politics now is about which group do you belong to? Which club are you in? Who do you identify with? Not what kinds of policies do you stand for? It's which club are you in? It's all about identification for the individual now. It's not about public policy. And that is a fundamental problem with our politics right now. What do you think of that?
I agree with you. I think there are other reasons that the Republicans aren't doing this. One of the things is that, yes, they did lose the House, the Senate, and the presidency, but not by much. Mm-hmm. If things had gone a little bit differently, 1 percentage points in 3 of those states, for instance, difference, Trump could still be president. If Trump had won the presidency, he wouldn't have sabotaged the election in Georgia, which cost Mitch McConnell his position as the majority leader. He was, so things could have happened a little bit differently, and despite the fact that he, has this incredible rhetoric, he picked up votes of Latinos almost everywhere. That's why a few of the congressional houses that had been won by Democrats in Southern California went back to Republicans, at least for the moment. We'll see if that lasts.
Right.
He more than doubled his vote with the young black men in particular. They were apparently they were impressed with his masculine presentation, even though they didn't like his policies. A very interesting movement there. So I think they feel like they've got the formula to win. They just need to, be a little bit more aggressive about it. They think they have it. They aren't worried about a majority. The Republicans have lost the majority in 6 of the last 7 presidential elections. The last time they won a real clean majority was Bush defeating Dukakis in 1988. After that, they've all been either close or Democrats winning by large margins, and they. So I don't think they even care. Care to get the majority vote. They just want to win, and I think they don't see that. And there's no organized opposition. We talked about that. Liz Cheney, maybe Mitt Romney, few other people here and there. Murkowski and Collins voted for the impeachment, but Murkowski, for one thing, is in a little bit of trouble in Alaska, and none of them are voting with Democrats on anything else. They spent their political capital of independence there. I mean, it's just, you can go through the different reasons, but and the core activists don't want any change. They want Trump. They want what he represents. This is, it's a dying brand of politics, but they want to have it as long as they can.
Well, let me follow up on that. What does he represent other than himself?
I think he represents, there's this whole concept that the Democrats represent wokeness and the whole loss of machismo, and there are a lot of people who are still really vested in masculinity as the indication of strong leadership. And so I do think that that's something that they want to hold on to. I think they really want to hold on to the nationalism. And the idea that the world is falling apart and we need to go back to some golden age, perceived golden age, whether it's the 50s, I don't know what it is. It's hard to pin them down on when that golden age was.
Yeah, I think that's the right answer. And the reason I asked it is because what's the solution to that? I mean, that indicates a psychosocial problem, a sociological problem that has a lot of history in it, right? And I'm not sure what you do about that. A lot of people are talking about reforming the mechanics of our political system, which I'm all for. And we could do a whole show on reforming our political system and how it works and how we choose our leaders from the local level all the way up to the national level. But and I'm for a lot of the reforms that have been proposed out there, not all of them, but a lot of them. But as far as changing the attitudes that exist within 35 to 45% of this society, that's where I run up against a wall, and I'm not sure how we change those attitudes. And I think that's going to be critical before we even get to political reform, right?
Yeah, it is. And, as I realize this, as we're talking about what we want to do with our show and presentations on Access Humboldt, there is no bipartisan dialogue on any media. We used to have Buckley's firing line where he'd have panels of 4 people on each side. Sometimes, like with the drug war, you would actually have a couple of conservatives, a couple of liberals on each side of the 4-person panels. You had the McLaughlin group. You had Washington Week in Review, where you had people from, different ideologies speaking about the issues. Crossfire, I was less impressed with, but it was at least a dialogue, between. It was more about earning points and beating the other side, but it was something. There was some discussion there. Now you've got your networks that are everybody has their own networks. A cable network news that they see as their, what they watch from their ideological or group perspective, as you point out. And they have token conservatives on CNN and MSNBC and token liberals on Fox News, but nothing that is really set up to be an actual debate. I'm not even seeing, you used to have Al Franken and Ann Coulter going on tour together, things like that. I'm not seeing any of that even outside of the mainstream media. There just isn't a premium right now on discussion, on trying to arrive at an understanding, not necessarily agreement, but even an understanding. Buckley understood his opponents. He understood. That's why he was able to win most of his debates, because he understood. He read their stuff, and he wasn't afraid to be exposed to it. It did affect him. He actually became more progressive as he got older and mellowed out a bit. He actually, not just on the drug war, but in the Iraq war, he even said, I think it's a good moral impulse to be a socialist, at least when you're young. He started to say things like that because he had been exposed to so many of them. Of course, granted, he picked a fight with Gore Vidal and all that. He was a hothead himself, and sometimes he got mauled in debates, like against Noam Chomsky, against Alan Dershowitz, who used to be, progressive, we don't have that anymore. We don't have conservative intellectualism anymore. Really, not really. Even Thomas Sowell is like on all Fox News. He used to be somebody I like to read. There just isn't a discussion about it, and the Republican Party in particular has no interest in any of that, in discussing ideas, because they don't even represent ideas, as you pointed out.
Right. Yeah. Complaining about a problem is easy. Solving a problem is where the work has to be put in, and that's where the difficulty arises. And on cable news, let's remember that they have 24 hours of time to fill. So they allow themselves to get into these long diatribes about these problems. And, there's not a lot of drive for solutions there. It's a lot of just sending out red meat to whether it's the left or the right, depending upon whether you're watching MSNBC or Fox or Newsmax or whatever it is. And I'm glad you brought that up because and we've talked about this before. Again, foundational to solving this problem is the national discussion, and cable news is not helping. However, again, what do you do about that? Remember, we have a First Amendment to deal with. And as long as MSNBC and CNN and Newsmax and OAN and all the rest find it profitable to do what they're doing, they're going to continue to do what they're doing because they have a lot of people to pay and some big salaries to pay. So as long as advertisers are okay with it, they're going to still be able to sell ads. And that means they're going to continue to do what they're doing. They are profit-driven entities. And, so what we do about our national discussion is, I think, foundational to everything. And I don't have the answer to it. I've said that before on this show. I'm being honest about that. I don't have the answer to it because it's complicated. It's not, there's no easy fix to it. There's also doesn't seem to be any political will to fix it. The people who could make the big decisions about this are in Washington, and they are the ones who are doing well with the status quo. So they have no incentive to vote against their own interests. So I don't know how it gets fixed, but I know it's not going to get fixed until there's the political will to get it fixed.
Well, we also have to look at our own political cultures. I very much identify as a progressive. I think it was a mistake, a huge mistake, to try to paint everybody who votes for Trump as a racist. Trump is a racist. We can point to multiple examples of that, but not all of the supporters are. He won in 2016 by painting Hillary Clinton as a champion of the elite. And part of the problem is her record shows her as a champion of the elite, NAFTA, all of that kind of stuff. Biden was able to cut into that. He's got a more folksy approach. He's got great ties with the union. So the Democrats did make alterations in their strategy, and it worked for him. It worked for Joe Biden. But we get into our own clusters of groups when we basically think that everybody outside us is morally inferior, and the people who said you cannot vote for Donald Trump unless you're at least accepting of racism was a huge mistake. It just it polarized. We cannot continue to talk that way. It's not even true. It's just there's many reasons that people voted for Trump that don't mean that they're hateful or even cult or anything like that. They voted for him because they're afraid of what's happening in the country, because they have experienced loss themselves and they see a decline in the country on different levels, and we have to address that. We have to discuss that because they're not wrong in all respects.
Right.
It's just
you're right. You're also right to bring up the elites, and let's remember this again. This gets to part of the fundamental problem. The elites have access because they have money, and in order to run a relevant national campaign in a winner-take-all system, it's expensive. So you've got to raise a lot of money, and guess what? The people who contribute big money have some expectations. And so, there's another problem: money in politics.
It is there. And we can analyze the Republican Party, why it's not changing, but it's basically because it's a cultural identity and it doesn't believe that it can win without really having that strong cultural identity as a party. That's what got it, got it to controlling everything from 2016 to 2018. There was a backlash in 2018 and 2020. They think they can overcome it, especially if they can make sure that Joe Biden's presidency is not successful. And that's why Joe Biden isn't trying to be bipartisan right now. He just wants to get certain things through so that the economy's in good shape in a couple of years in the next election. And it probably will work. It will probably, we'll probably be economically much better off in a year from now. And the Democrats will run on that and try to avoid the typical loss that happens with every first term, midterm election against the president's party.
Well, I think Biden's analysis that there's no appetite for bipartisanship in Washington is correct right now in this moment. So I think he's correct right now. But there is a lot that has been written recently about how we reform our political system, and maybe on one of these shows we can get into some of the suggestions. They're a little bit complex, but there are a lot of very smart people on both sides of this divide who have done a lot of research and a lot of writing on maybe a few things that we could do. A book I've recommended before is Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop by a guy named Lee Drutman, and I recommend that people find that. He's done a lot of research and he has a lot of good ideas in there. But the point is, there are a lot of folks like us who are not in the seats of power in Washington who are looking at this and arguing that we need to do something about this and we need to do something soon. So we're not alone.
No, I agree. All right. Well, that brings us to towards the end of our show when we bring out our crystal balls and we talk about what may or may not happen in the future. Okay, Chuck, what do you got?
Oh, I got two things. One, and you mentioned this earlier. We did not talk about this before the show, but it's interesting you mentioned it. It's on my mind as well. DC statehood. This week, I believe it was just earlier today, I read about it this evening. DC statehood, H.R. 51. People who are interested in this should look up H.R. 51. It has just passed out of a committee, so it's going to at least be considered. Now, whether it could pass without filibuster reform is a huge question, but it's being moved forward in the process in Washington. So my prediction is that it's going to be DC statehood that really calls the question on the filibuster reform, and that could be soon. That could be within the next week or two. We'll see what the appetite for that is in Washington. The second quick thing, I have a new candidate that I think is going to announce soon in the state of North Carolina. It's former Governor Pat McCrory. He's a Republican who's going to run for the seat that's being vacated by Richard Burr. And that's also a seat that had been looked at by some of the Trump family members. We'll see if the fact that McCrory may announce soon indicates that some of the Trumps are not going to go for that seat.
Okay, well, interesting. Of course, DC statehood would mean two more Democratic senators and at least one or two House members. Same thing with Puerto Rico, by the way, because that discussion is coming up as well. All right, my prediction, going back to Kristen Clark, I believe she will be appointed 50-50 with a Harris tiebreak. The reason I believe is I don't think Manchin is going to turn against her because Clyburn, Congressman Clyburn of South Carolina, who basically his endorsement and his plug is what gave Biden the nomination, very powerful figure in the Democratic Party right now, is going to talk to Manchin about filibuster reform and its racist roots, filibuster's racist slavery roots, and really try to press him on that. And with that being in the headlines, I don't think Manchin's going to want to buck a vote for Kristen Clark on this basis. We're so polarized on race that would look really bad if he did that, and I think even he can't afford to do that. So I'm predicting Kristen Clark will pass with Manchin's support, and and that that Clyburn may actually get Mankin to come off of his solid position against any kind of filibuster reform. He seems to go back and forth on that anyway.
Yep.
All right. Well, that takes us to the end of the show. Chuck, thank you very much. We will be back next week. Oh, and if you have anything you want us to talk about or any comments, please contact us at redwoodwonk@gmail.com. And until next time, keep thinking.